You know, I always knew what I wanted to be when I grow up, and I think it always was a grumpy old news anchor with a show called... It's Today's Fiasco with George. Okay, so here's the deal. Net neutrality is the principle of forging a giant defiant palm in between the internet service providers and the content the internet provides. It's the abstract term used to refer to the way the internet has traditionally worked for decades, now being codified into laws that are catching up with the tech. Like in 2008 when the FCC extended out that palm and told Comcast no when they were caught throttling their customers' speeds. The FCC listed their net neutrality rules in 2010's Open Internet Order, which asked ISPs to 1. Be transparent about how they handle network congestion, 2. Prohibit them from blocking sites on wired networks, and 3. To disallow unreasonable discrimination against online content made by competitors. Those regulations were challenged in 2011 by Verizon. Their lawsuit against net neutrality persisted all the way to a federal court case that decided in 2014 that the FCC's first rule was fine, but the other two were too mean. And almost right away after the ruling, AT&T was already filing patents for bandwidth discriminating technology. Net neutrality was in jeopardy yet again, so the FCC tried again in 2015, this time deciding to reclassify broadband service as a telecom service rather than an information service by way of Title II, a set of regulations that helped break up the old Bell telephone monopoly during the Depression. Applying a modernized version of those rules to the internet was a very, very popular choice with the people, but 2 of the 5 FCC chairmen thought it was pure dumb. The 2 Republican commissioners who voted against it were Michael O'Reilly and the now infamous Ajit Pai. Presidents picking their cohorts for FCC commissioners have to choose some from the minority party as well, which is how Ajit Pai ended up on the board after the previous Republican left to work at Comcast, which is how in the midst of a lawsuit against Verizon, a former Verizon attorney has found himself replacing a Comcast hire and being promoted from commissioner to chairperson of the FCC by President Trump, all of which has me believing that this sentence right here on the FCC's own mission statement is one of those bits of legalese that starts to mean the exact opposite of what you think it means as your income level goes higher. Anyways, this is a gaming channel. What does it mean for games? It means we're in a terrifyingly connected globe of industries who can affect each other without having really anything to do with each other. In other words, the video game industry is heavily dependent on the ISP industry, as more and more revenue is earned through online purchases. Online communities advertise games better than Super Bowl commercials, and this whole enormous lifestyle branding ecosystem has popped up in the past few years where streaming hours of online video and downloading 50 gigabytes per game has now become normal. And that's a lot of bandwidth that the ISPs have always, and will always, argue isn't cheap. It is in their best interest to charge whatever they can for whatever they can, and the reality for most Americans is that this is not a competitive enough market to avoid that kind of price gouging. So, what's the internet going to look like in 2 years? Well, there's probably going to be gamer-specific ISP packages rolled out at some point. I have heard rumors of those being tossed around boardrooms, and it seems like the obvious choice. What's not rumors are a couple new services cropping up that a pal of mine named Matthew Galt over at Vice Motherboard has done a story on, and now be advised, we have done one podcast together, and he's covered wars, you know. So, rounding out the day's depressing news is this roundup of new services aiming to make the best of a net non-neutral world. Services like Outfox and Haste claim to increase the online performance of just about any game, using the metaphor that the software dynamically looks at what the fastest routes are. It's effectively a toll lane for your traffic. Gaming optimization services and VPNs are likely to become more popular over the next couple years. If you've ever visited China or the Middle East, you kind of know how those programs work. They're not the kind of programs that anyone would ever feel good buying, so I have to wonder if they'd really catch on a big way. They just capitalize on how crappy the situation already is. Americans are not used to that. But if you're living in Trumpland for the next 2 years, expect to be tempted to at some point buy this crap. Apparently they work, though. They shaved 10 milliseconds off of his ping, so that would be a more relevant problem if his ping was unacceptable to begin with because his ISP throttled his internet because he hit, let's say, a monthly 300 gigabyte data limit. Maybe you have to pay us more, but we can make it faster. So what's also likely to happen are behind-the-scenes deals struck between game companies and ISP companies in order to try and preserve the status quo. And new businesses are going to suffer because of that. They're going to have to work harder than the previous generations did, because the previous generation didn't have to fight for the privilege of being in a fast lane during their earlier levels of development. Under Pi's proposed plans, there's no reason Steam or Origin wouldn't have to strike a deal for better access to a specific ISP's customers, or to even pay for the privilege of being included in those fast lanes in the first place. Because Riot Games, League of Legends, they already do this. Google, Facebook, and Netflix do it too, but Riot has an ISP partnership-powered network backbone they call Riot Direct, and it's an effort to work with ISPs to ensure that League of Legends packets are always getting sent to the fastest servers, creating a unique network that their tech writer said was like building our own internet. But that's League of Legends, spending League of Legends money. The vast majority of game companies aren't going to be able to build their own internet to circumvent draconian ISP policies. Steam, Origin, Blizzard, and Riot are all likely to be fine, they're advantaged already, but the growth of mid-sized competitor companies, the really good ones that actually could one day overtake Steam, like GOG or Humble Bundle, they'll be stunted, competing in a slower lane with a higher bar to pass than their predecessors did. Under these kinds of conditions and these kinds of markets, those big companies who were once the good guys steadily and inevitably become the bad guys, as no one better shows up to replace them. These are predictions that do look pessimistic, but they're already happening. After 2014, mobile companies don't have to follow net neutrality, so it's now not uncommon to find American mobile companies, like Verizon, offering free data when viewing content made by partnered companies. Likewise, there is at least one Portuguese mobile company that has app-specific data cap exceptions that aren't a far cry off from the Photoshop dystopias. After 2014, wireless was allowed to go to the dark side as if they hadn't already before, and up until today, there were actually separate sets of rules for wireless and wired carriers, and a lot of the challenge was in keeping wireless business practices out of the same companies that provide our wired connections for home computers, and that's actually something that has me scared still, because have you guys been to a Best Buy lately? Computers are going away. I wouldn't be surprised if in 20 to 30 years, the home wired internet connection goes the way of the landline. In the meantime, before that happens, hoping for the best by relying on either the sheer luck or the asymmetrical warfare that is an unrestrained free market dominated by Comcast is, probably not the wisest of decisions if you know what a Comcast is. The companies at the top of the ISP and cell phone businesses represent the exact worst-case scenarios of what happens when companies get too big and slowly become regional monopolies. The oceans will close up and mountains will flatten by the time you finally get a hold of someone at Comcast.
Connect, please. Okay, so why is it that you don't want the faster speed? Help me understand why you don't want faster internet.
Help me understand why you can't just disconnect us.
But wait, this is a gaming channel, right? What does it have to do with gaming? As customers are squeezed harder for both their bandwidth and their dollars, they'll have less of a disposable amount of either to spend on games. Remember that nowadays, even offline single-player games have you downloading tens of gigabytes. I think the most underappreciated underdog victim of the recession was the video game rental industry. This thing was controlled by Blockbuster, and they lost their competition against Netflix. Movies are easier on Netflix anyway, but we lost game rentals, and that's the thing that, kills my heart deep down on the inside. I would so love to be able to pay $6 to rent video games again. That's the kind of microtransaction I want, but the industry has been trying to fill that hole by using streaming services, and that's where net neutrality kinda nips progress in the bud. Streaming over a constant hours-long video feed of an entire video game through the internet can actually be the cheapest way to experience a lot of older games at their most poverty-friendly prices. I mean, you get what you pay for, but the idea of net neutrality going away makes those products go away, which means less jobs for the people making those products, less cutting-edge tech being developed to make those products possible, and less money being circulated through the economy to buy these products. The streaming market is shifty and half-baked as it is. There's potential there, but, well, that's hard to imagine now. It sounds far-fetched, right? These concerns of mine sound like hysterical doomsday naysaying. I heard Ajit Pai say just as much earlier today when he initiated the vote to repeal net neutrality on a stream.
It is difficult to match that mundane reality to the apocalyptic rhetoric that we have heard from Title II supporters. And as the debate has gone on, their claims have gotten more and more outlandish.
In all this time, I've yet to hear recent unquestionable evidence of demonstrable harms to consumers that demands providers be constrained by this completely flawed regulatory intervention.
I lived through it. I was part of a Comcast 300 gigabyte data cap routine that they were shelling out as an experimental temporary measure in Atlanta before Google Fiber set up shop. The moment Google Fiber set up shop, they rolled that change back really quick. But the point is, they got away with it. For about 2 going on 3 years, I had to deal with a 300 gigabyte data cap, and it fucking sucked. This apartment with like 2, sometimes 3 people in it would regularly go over. I remember the first time we went over, I was playing Call of Duty Ghosts. What a stupid fucking game that was. But it was a 40 gigabyte download. You got 300 gigabytes. Games are like between 50 and 60 gigabytes nowadays, so that's you and all your roommates' allotment of like 2 games plus 6 hours of video a month. Good luck. Enjoy. I realized that years ago I was making the conscientious decision to not upgrade my internet for $35 a month, and I was also noticing that a lot more YouTubers were getting into streaming around 2014, 2015, and I sure wasn't. I could not afford to. There were certain genres of video that were off limits for me because of this data cap. I could not make videos about streaming services. I could not stream games onto my consoles. I could not stream games to audiences on Twitch. The whole concept of streaming was just a very dangerous game to play with. So I have to wonder how different my situation would look today if I had those options available to me 4 years ago instead of 1 year ago. Which ironically correlates to the period of internet law Ajit Pai wants us to go back to. He often says that during the 2 years since net neutrality became law, investment in broadband has decreased by oh my god. I can't believe it. The reports are true. Our numbers are down by 5%. Oh my god! Even though that kind of fluctuation has been super normal over the past decade, and looking at 1 year of data isn't good statistics, and it's not even accurate! I also like how he constantly refers to the net neutrality regulation as monopoly era rules. As if we're not currently about to enter into a monopoly era, because I guess he didn't read the news this morning. The FCC's own data shows that the vast majority of Americans only have a choice between 2 internet providers. Plus, the past 2 years saw an explosion in all the relevant online video markets across the board. Whether the company was big or small, whether it's Amazon Prime Video or Filmstruck or just more YouTube ads than before, the 2 years in which we did have net neutrality laws saw a skyrocketing amount of money being made with online videos. And I'm a statistic in that pile. I should be in there somewhere, I think. I'm a part of Patreon, and over the past 2 years, Patreon has exploded into this ecosystem of lower class people who are now able to move into the middle class, while the bigwigs over there investing in the broadband industry are adjusting their budgets by a single percentage point. You have people who are suddenly no longer able to be poor by selling skills at something they're passionate in that they love, like making porn. They're creating media, they're creating value, they're making money, and none of that is going back to the old networks except for your monthly ISP bill. If you want an actually valid, reasonable, understandable, and realistic explanation behind why these cable types are so spooked by net neutrality, the answer is simple. The next generation just doesn't want cable. That's it. They just want to watch Patreon. So, what's next? Lawsuits. Lawsuits are next. To paraphrase Cory Doctorow, there are lawsuits to be heard regarding the legality of the rules, lawsuits regarding the applicability of the rules. Are states allowed to make their own net neutrality rules? Is the FCC allowed to say they can't? The FCC is supposed to have evidence required before making a big move like this, and Ajit Pai's cited evidence of declining investments isn't accurate nor fair. The FCC's other big piece of evidence are millions of copy-pasted bot-generated comments with stolen identities attached to them that just like flooded their website one day. It is the most obvious asinine crock of bullshit since the original camera angles in Metal Gear Solid 3! And lastly, I think it's important to note a sharp change in aggression lately. The political rhetoric of both sides fears an internet controlled by either the government or the corporations. But it's not really that much of a partisan issue. In 2014, surveys pegged net neutrality support at 81%. In 2017, that's now 83%. Republicans and Democrats alike support net neutrality. Many filthy rich venture capitalists support net neutrality. The internet's original engineers support net neutrality. This isn't a partisan line, it's a line drawn in cable. I think it's also important to read Pai's dissent letter from 2015 and compare it to his attitude today. Back then, his arguments were laser-focused against Title II, not against net neutrality itself. He cites quotes from ISPs who openly claim to support net neutrality but just want it enforced differently. Back then, it was a matter of compromise, not conquest. And now, emboldened in 2017, he has been open and adamant about repealing net neutrality.
What is something, pulling back Title II, what is something that an ISP or an internet company can do that they wouldn't be able to do as easily under Title II?
Well, nothing, in my view, because if you look at the record that the FCC had on the books in 2015, internet service providers were not willy-nilly blocking traffic and throttling traffic. To the contrary, these were all phantoms that were conjured up by people who wanted the FCC for political reasons to overregulate the internet. And
he's so confident that his opponents are nut jobs that he thought it would be a good idea to make this. So if you're wondering why a grown-ass 44-year-old man with a family with a BA from Harvard, a position in charge of the world's largest economy, is being seen here, wearing a Santa outfit with a fidget spinner mocking the will of the American people who have no power nor say in his decisions, there you go.